inviting that we're welcoming Professor Bertil Emre from Koç University. She is the UNESCO Chair on Gender Equality and Sustainable Development. She's a professor of constitutional law at Koç University. She received her PhD from the University of Cologne, and her research focuses on constitutionalism, human rights, and gender equity. So I'm not going to speak much longer. I'm just going to invite Professor Oda to the floor, and then there should be time for questions at the end, so please do be thinking of your questions.
Dear participants, dear colleagues, dear members of the IFLA, IFLA, it's just an immense pleasure for me to be part of this very significant and truly amazing organization. I would like to extend my sincere thanks and sincere regards to all committee members, to all participants, and to all colleagues. In my speech, I would like to focus on, as you see on the slide, gender equality, resilience, and sustainable development by putting emphasis on the outcomes of the recent research to strengthen our knowledge and developing some recommendations and some thoughts, ideas as regards actions and the resilience. As you know, 2025 marks the 10th anniversary of the adoption of the Agenda 2030 for the Sustainable Development Goals. And it is deemed as a plan of action and a collective effort, better to say a collective journey for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals from 2015 to 2030. And during the UN Summit of the Future in last September 2024, the United Nations member states reaffirmed their commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals and effective multilateralism by adopting the Pact for Future, the Global Digital Compact, and Declaration on Future Generation through consensus. However, as the reports and findings show, none of the 17 SDGs that I would like elaborate further will be achieved by 2030, including the Sustainable Development Goal 5, which is gender equality, and including a specific Sustainable Development Goal on gender equality was viewed as a strategy, actually, to mobilize the governments, mobilize the civil society and the scholars, aimed at overcoming persistent barriers that hinder women and girls from realizing their capacities and the full development of the societies as well. And in this respect, the targets under Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly Sustainable Development Goal 5, gender equality, also included different types of actions, such as removing discriminatory laws and social norms, putting emphasis on gender stereotypes, the elimination of gender-based violence, valuing the unpaid care work of women, and closing the gender gaps in access to public services, and particularly in access to political positions. And despite improvements worldwide in non-discriminatory legislation as regards the formal arrangements realizing gender equality, and women's political participation under Sustainable Development Goal number 5 in the last 10 years, and which are to be deemed as the indicators of progress as well, the effectiveness of policy implementation remains, unfortunately, truly questionable in all domestic settings and at the global scale. And my submission aims to evaluate effective policy frameworks and measures, identify the current salient gaps, and explore the ways to promote further progress. And in this context, I would like to contribute to the pathways approach, to the diversities that we observe in different types of jurisdictions, linking gender equality, women's agency, civic partnerships, and sustainable development. And in this respect, probably we should at first emphasize the development of sustainable development goals and their meaning for the gender equality, to identify the interlinkages between the gender equality and the realization patterns of sustainable development. Sustainable development in public debate as well as in public documents has widespread in the last 30 years, not in the last 10 years actually. However, the ways to reach this goal or the likelihood of success still involve considerable uncertainties. We all know that sustainability is the buzzword. However, it is also complex and often a very detailed concept, usually linked to visions of people living in harmony with nature, or it is also described as a framework that benefits humanity, the environment, and economic growth. Since the late 80s, the policy perspectives have typically characterized sustainability in normative terms, and they linked the sustainability to a recognizable set of environmental and economic values. In 1987, the World Commission on Environment and Development report defined the sustainability as the most comprehensive explanation of development, and this involves the practices that enable current generations to meet their basic needs without compromising the ability of future generations to do the same, to provide the continuation, to provide the sustainability in this sense. However, we should also adopt a critical approach to this widespread definition of sustainability in the policymaking and in the scholarship. First, we can emphasize that the social aspects of sustainability are often undervalued, even though there are references to those social dimensions, but they must be fully incorporated in these discussions. Secondly, it is essential to concentrate not only on intergenerational equity, but also on equity within each generation. Third, the dominant policies and discourse of development produced by the institutions, actors, processes, and narratives are unsustainable in economic, social, and environmental terms, since they are heavily market-oriented. They reinforce the continuation of the current growth model despite the scarcity of resources in all member states of the United Nations. Fourth, although the costs and effects of environmental challenges are also experienced unequally, including along gender lines, this also reinforces and reproduces inequalities. The exclusionary and discriminatory aspects related to gender, race, poverty, and other discriminatory grounds are to be considered seriously, and they are not adequately addressed in the policies on sustainability. Hopefully, the United Nations continues to make meaningful and thoughtful efforts to address current and future sustainability issues. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals that you see on the slides with different types of descriptions, including, of course, the Sustainable Development Goal 5, gender equality, and related 169 targets present a major achievement in terms of promoting and defending sustainable policies, projects, and practices globally. In 2015, the member states of the United Nations reached in this collective action through the Sustainable Development Goals to eradicate poverty, to improve the living standards and well-being of all people, promote peace and more inclusive societies, and particularly reverse the trend of environmental degradation. The 2020 Agenda for Sustainable Development aims to promote balanced development economically, socially, and particularly environmentally in all countries around the world, ensuring that no one is left behind. This is the most significant slogan of the Sustainable Development Goals as an aim. The agenda emphasizes particular attention to the most excluded communities, most marginalized people through its predefined 17 Sustainable Development Goals, with each goal accompanied by a long list of targets to achieve. Reaching all 169 targets would mean fulfilling all the goals as a plan of action, as a concrete strategy for realization of sustainable development goals. Of course, the 2030 Agenda builds on previous commitments, including the goals outlined previously in the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, and the Millennium Declaration. And much of the period before and after the Millennium Development Goals target date, as well as in many, many regions, saw significant progress, really significant progress in areas also covered by Sustainable Development Goals as regards the income poverty, as regards particularly access to education and health services, access to clean water, all those areas were areas of progress. In other words, trying to develop a strategic plan, a collective commitment in concrete sense works, even though it is not sufficient enough. As regards some areas, including the gender equality, we have a less pronounced approach as regards access to sanitation facilities, as regards development projects for elderly, and particularly as regards managing the emergency situations and the crises. There are so many hurdles and the progress is not sufficient enough. Still, the Sustainable Development Goals are regarded as more ambitious, comprehensive, and universally approachable and applicable compared to the Millennium Development Goals and other earlier policy recommendations. Addressing global challenges across social, economic, and environmental areas, the 2030 Agenda clearly states that sustainable development requires building peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. Accordingly, it explicitly recognizes the social dimension, the social drivers, socio-political, and probably most importantly, the socio-legal aspects of development and sustainability. And this is also in line with the research findings that are studied by some of the scholars. For example, Henderson and Laura demonstrate that social progress is outpacing environmental progress as regards development. Therefore, it is important to prioritize actions that address power dynamics, inequality, development and education in lower income countries to sustain the ecosystem and enhance well-being. Furthermore, the United Nations has also identified 6 major mega trends related to the SDGs. And in this respect, beginning from 2017, the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, which is one of the reliable and reputable research institute under the umbrella of the United Nations, stated that these megatrends are poverty, inequalities, demography, environmental degradation and climate change, shocks and crises, development cooperation, financing for development, and technological innovation. When we turn back to gender equality, defined as the Sustainable Development Goal 5, as achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls, we have to identify some specific points in general, then I would like to proceed with some priority of concerns in line with the research findings of the United Nations and other researchers. In this respect, the gender equality remains one of the most difficult vital goals among all SDGs because it influences the success of all other targets. It is some sort of a cross-cutting issue for all sustainable development goals. Women's crucial role in sustainable development is underscored by the fact that many sustainable development targets explicitly acknowledge gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment as both goals and as part of the solution itself. For instance, countries face many challenges that disproportionately affect women and girls due to economic and social disadvantages. And it is also evident and it is also recognized that protecting the rights of women and girls across these goals significantly promotes justice, inclusion, and diversity. Nevertheless, despite being more affected, women often hold vital ideas and leadership to address these issues. In other words, empowering women and girls creates a multiplier effect that speeds up economic growth and development across all areas of life. Research and policy studies in different domestic contexts show that women's political participation and their agency promote equality policies and equality politics in the decision-making, and this is crucial for the substantive representation. When I refer to substantive representation, I use a very specific conceptualization developed by Pitkin, late 60s. In line with Pitkin's conceptualization, the substantive representation is the activity of representing as acting for the others. It is just an action in terms of representation for acting for others. When we apply this conceptualization of substantive representation to women as political actors within the decision-making bodies at all levels, we evaluate the activities concerning women's rights and women's interests, which are often undervalued under ordinary and mostly patriarchal political systems. Substantive representation is frequently operationalized and also measured at the parliaments in different studies, including the reports of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. For example, when we look at the research on local councils, the panchayats in India, we clearly identify that areas with women-led councils, local councils, had 62% more drinking water projects than those with men-led local councils. And similarly, when we look at Norway, for example, women's participation in the municipal councils changed the local policies as regards child coverage and as regards the social issues. All in all, in other domestic contexts, we can identify a similar trend of substantive representation produced by women politicians, women decision makers, and sustainable development cannot advance without women's participation across various processes and programs. However, when we look at to the general landscape, the interconnections between unsustainability and gender inequalities are often ignored or they are only partially recognized in policymaking and implementation. Development regimes, there may be domestic development regimes or there may be different types of international development projects. All those frequently overlook that market-oriented growth produces and perpetuates that unsustainability and gender inequality through overconsumption, through exploitation of natural resources, and particularly through unfair wealth distribution. And this has resulted in economic, social, food, energy, and environmental crisis that threaten political stability, that threaten the ecosystems, the livelihoods, the urban and rural landscapes. And the crisis driven by current production modes founded on inequalities lead to increasing inequalities, including those based on gender. And the same socioeconomic drivers have a huge impact both on unsustainability, the growth-based production mode, and gender inequalities. However, again, when we look at to the models or the production modes developed by women collectives, such as solidarity economies, alternative agrarian production, or food security chains developed by different types of women's initiatives and cooperatives, all those propose modifications to or transform current neoliberal economic growth model. And in light of present challenges, women's inclusion, particularly the inclusion of the experiences of women in the economic development, may provide a contribution to the progress, and it may also transform the current unsustainable economic growth model. In this respect, considering the multiple aspects of gender equality and sustainable development, I would like to reflect on the selected priority issues to highlight the successes and, of course, the failures of equality frameworks, policies, and practices. And in this context, I will consider particularly the implementation of legal frameworks on gender equality, which is usually regarded as one of the easiest pathway for realization of gender equality, and I would like to provide some sort of a critical assessment to this assumption of the easy way of doing things through legal frameworks. And second, I would like to discuss just a little bit the education and gender issue and proceed with political representation and participation. And finally, I would like to critically discuss the prevention of violence against women by putting emphasis on recent socio-political developments as well as the recent research. When we look at to the legal frameworks and their implementation, according to the World Bank's Women, Business and the Law 2023 study, which actually reveals all legal frameworks for women, only 14 countries out of 190 countries worldwide provide full legal protections for women. And these countries include Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Greece, Iceland, Ireland, Latvia, Luxembourg, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, Germany, and the Netherlands. And all those countries offer at least legal equality between men and women in comprehensive sense. In 2024, the World Bank's actual relevance study was improved, and it included not only the legal frameworks that we call as the de jure legal frameworks, but also the supportive implementing policies and mechanisms. We call this the de facto equality or de facto mechanisms, as well as the expert opinions for outcomes. And it is actually here. It is actually provides a three-pillar analysis, including the legal frameworks, the supportive frameworks, expert opinions. In other words, it refers to the structure as legal frameworks, it refers to the implementation or the patterns supporting or enhancing the implementation, and the expert opinions, and this is the results, this is the outcome. It is just a three-pillar model of research. And in doing so, it now covers 10 different types of indicators. You see the indicators at the final stage of the slide: safety, mobility, workplace, etc. So it is just a very well structured research, and it is truly reliable. It is just a cross-country analysis that we can take the advantage of the research results. And in terms of the research results, today women have less than 2/3 of the legal rights available to men globally. And when we look at to the OECD countries, and particularly high-income countries, Italy ranks with 95, the highest score is 100, and followed by the New Zealand and Portugal with 92. And notably, the high-income economies have an average score of 75, while upper middle income countries are close behind with a score of approximately 67. Lack of safety and childcare measures discourages women from entering the global workforce, and when these indicators, lack of safety and childcare, are provided, there may be improvement. This is the finding of the recent study of the World Bank. When we look at to the gaps again, the report shows us a significant gap in practice. Although the laws state that women have approximately 64% of men's rights, which is still very low, most economies have put in place, unfortunately, less than 40%. In other words, when we look at to the realization of legal rights in formal sense, there is a gap. However, there is another gap, which is to be regarded as a hidden gap, including high-income economies. That is to say, the most economies have put in place less than 40% of the rights which are legally recognized. So there is a huge implementation gap that the report shows us. And when we look at, for example, 98 economies, they have legislation requiring equal pay for equal work, which is another significant issue that we define as the pay gap, but only 35 have measures. And in terms of pay gap, in terms of the lack of the supportive framework for equal pay for equal work principle, we need a certain progress for realization of the legally recognized rights. Then we look at the statistical data that I highly recommend on the web page of the World Bank. This is public. This is available to public. And when you look at this publicly available data, you may also clearly identify the trends in the regions. You may also clearly point out to the differences between high income and low income economies, and you can make also your own critical assessment. When I proceed with education and gender, there is a progress in terms of girls' education. However, there are many worrying trends worldwide that we identify at the global scale, and there are different types of regional or country-specific patterns. The number of out-of-school girls at the primary level has been reduced by half since 1999. This is the good news. Globally, primary and secondary school enrollment rates are becoming more equal for girls and boys. But while enrollment rates are similar, completion rates for girls are lower in low-income countries. In low-income countries, secondary school completion rates for girls also continue to lag. UNICEF data show that in 2000, more girls than boys were out of school worldwide at all levels. However, currently the trend has reversed with approximately over 6 million more boys out of school than girls. So it is another worrying trend. So there is a change in the trend, seemingly favoring the girls. However, we should be cautious about the trend, the worrying trend as regards the boys. And this, of course, indicates substantial progress in girls' education over the past 30 years. However, we should also develop some thoughts and new policies as regards the promotion of education for boys. When we look at, again, to the global data hides usually notable disparities in adolescent girls' educational access. For instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, more girls than boys are out of school at every level. In other words, yes, the global data is truly significant to analyze the global trends. However, the regional context and country-specific context should be also carefully followed. Violence and emergencies hinder progress towards gender equality in education. According to the evidence report of the Global Women's Institute and the Australian government, it is estimated that about 60 million girls are usually sexually assaulted during their commute to or at school each year at the global scale. So it is just a horrifying data. The sexual violence and throughout education is not only a matter of concern for developing countries, and a report for the National Institute of Justice of the United States covering a long-term survey beginning from 1995 ending at 2013. This survey demonstrated that approximately 14% of female students had experienced sexual violence during their time at the university. And this is another worrying data that we should closely focus on the sexual harassment policies at the higher education institutions. According to another global synthesis report provided by the World Bank, more than 41,000 girls under the age of 18 marry every day. Every day. This is just another data that should be thought carefully. In terms of political representation, we can take the advantage of, again, different research data. However, what is quite striking, this is the data of the International Parliamentary Union, which is actually which is updated regularly and which is a reliable data when we consider the difficulties as regards cross-country analysis. When we look at this data, as of June 1st, 2025, 27 countries have 31 women serving as the heads of the state or the heads of the government, as prime ministers or as the state presidents. Considering the current pace of developments in the political representation of women in the high-ranking positions, including the prime ministers and the state presidents, gender equality in top leadership positions won't be achieved. It won't be achieved for another 130 years, according to the UN Women calculations. When we look at to the statistical data retrieved from the countries, only 6 countries have 50% or more women in parliament in single or lower houses. Here you see on the left side, as a leading country, Rwanda, with 40 64% as far as I remember, according to the recent data of the Interparliamentary Union, including the lower or the single house and the upper chamber of the parliament. And in case of Rwanda, we have the constitutional quota as a policy preference, as a constitutional policy preference, and it is a 30% constitutional quota. And other countries which follow Rwanda is Cuba, Nicaragua, Andorra, Mexico, and the other states that you see on the list, including the United Arab Emirates and Costa Rica, New Zealand, Bolivia, and Australia. When we look at to the regional data, women hold the highest percentage of the parliamentary seats in Latin America and Caribbean, with 36%. When we look at, for example, Central and Southern Asia, this region has the lowest percentage of women parliamentarians at 17 of the, or all member of the parliaments. The global effort to promote women's participation in decision-making on equal terms has become one of the leading collaborative initiatives worldwide over the past 2 years, and hopefully this resulted in a new CEDAW general recommendation. CEDAW, CEDAW general recommendation is the general recommendation of the CEDAW committee, and the CEDAW committee is the committee of the Convention on Elimination of all kinds of discrimination against women. The CEDAW committee, as the committee of the CEDAW Convention, adopted this recommendation last year, known as the General Recommendation 40, and this recommendation highlights gender parity in decision-making. And this is the very first global instrument, which is a recommendation, however, which is of a higher value as compared to different kinds of resolutions and other soft law instruments of the international human rights law. It is to be deemed as a very powerful, as a very strong stance of a quasi-judicial body of the United Nations International Human Rights framework. And significantly, this general recommendation was finalized after a period of consultation process conducted throughout 2023 and 2024, involving the civil society, the scholars, and other policy makers. And the consultancies are provided in different cities of the world, including Cairo, Istanbul, Addis Ababa, Bogota, and Bangkok. This point is crucial because when we look at to the UN bodies, we usually face with the criticism that it is just a top-down approach. It is some sort of a policy making, imposing the priorities of the UN bureaucracy, etc., etc. When we look at to the general recommendation, we observe another trend, which is based on consultations with the civic society, with the decision makers, and with the scholars. Another significant problem, issue, or a priority of concern that I would like to focus on very quickly is the violence against women issue. In this sense, hopefully, we observe different types of developments worldwide, including a regional development, and the substantive representation issue is one of the crucial conceptualizations, again, that I would like to highlight. In Rwanda, for example, that we observe as the leading country in terms of political participation through the constitutional quota, the women parliamentarians became instrumental in drafting and passing the country's gender-based violence legislation in 2009, and they also promoted the protection scheme as regards the protection of women and girls against domestic violence and violence against women. In Uganda, again, we observe one of the best practices that the women parliamentarians again played a key role in adoption of the domestic violence bill and the prohibition of female genital mutilation bill and the marriage and divorce bill. However, violence against women is a major public health issue, and it is still the leading cause that threatens actually the health of women and girls. According to the studies of the World Health Organization, 1 in 3, which makes the 30% of the female population worldwide, have experienced physical and sexual violence by an intimate partner or non-partner at some point in their lives. And most of this violence comes from, unfortunately, from the intimate partners. When we look at to the recent developments in terms of prevention of violence, hopefully we again identify different types of collaborative networks that the international bodies, the international organizations have become the part of the solution in coordination with the domestic actors and in coordination with the civil society, and particularly feminist civil society. In this respect, I would like to draw your attention to RESPECT project. The RESPECT project is just a global project, and it is just a multi-partner project that the World Health Organization, UN, women, and also the other bodies of the domestic actors, as well as the UN bodies are involved. So it is just a multi-stakeholder, multi-partner, and a collaborative project, which has been conducted at the domestic level, and providing such a large-scale consortium-based project has the advantage of monitoring in terms of identification of the achievements or the outcomes of the ongoing project. So it is just an action coalition, and this action coalition includes 7 strategies. It is very well structured, including the empowerment of women, including the services, development of services, and the monitoring the services, enabling environments for women in terms of providing a safety environment in schools, at work, and in the public places. And in this sense, the transformed attitudes, beliefs, and norms is also regarded as a part of this project. And each of these 7 strategies has interventions in low and high resource settings with varying evidence of effectiveness. And these instruments of effectiveness and all policies include different types of actions, such as resource allocation as cash transfers to the women in need, the community mobilization to change gender norms, school programs promoting safety, group-based participatory education for women and men that aim actually provide a transformation as regards gender stereotypes and gender power imbalances. And these interventions should address unequal gender power dynamics, promote participation, empower women, and address multi-risk factors through comprehensive programs. And investing in women's rights organization is also an essential part of this Respect Women project that I highly recommend to all participants to check on internet. We can be part of this Respect project through our communities, through civic participation, and through involvement in the women's rights organizations, and universities also support the Respect project. And the Istanbul Convention is the second instrument that I would like to highlight as the Council of Europe Convention on Prevention of Domestic Violence and Violence Against Women, and still sets the most developed framework, the golden standard, with its consolidated approach, catalog of crimes, effective preventive and protective measures, and extra-legal policy orientations and raising awareness in the society. And besides the Bellum do Para Convention, which is the Inter-American Convention for Eradication of Violence Against Women, this is the second international human rights instrument worldwide dealing with the violence against women as a priority of concern by developing a robust legal, social, and political framework for prevention of violence. Even though it has the name of Istanbul, even though it is a Council of Europe Convention, it is a global convention. It is open to different member states of the United Nations, and recently the European Union has become also one of the contracting parties of the Istanbul Convention. And additionally, and finally, the very recent EU directive, the European Union directive on prevention of violence against women and domestic violence was adopted finally last year, and it is the very first comprehensive legal instrument to tackle violence against women and girls at the EU level. However, even though it is just a very progressive and a robust document, it did not include an EU-wide definition of sexual assault and rape, and this omission missed a crucial chance to criminalize rape and gender-based violence against women with a consent-based approach. And the European Women's Lobby actually supported the adoption of the EU directive. However, it also expressed its regret regarding the decision made by France and Germany to exclude an article on the harmonized definition of rape-based consent. So this is one of the areas that the feminist civil society at the global and European scale should discuss in near future. And another disappointing point was the approach of the recent directive that aims to strike a balance between the freedom of expression and the cyber attacks against women on internet. So in this sense, there is a hurdle in the directive that should be discussed by different European stakeholders. The UN Women also criticized the directive for lacking an effective consultative process with the international stakeholders and the mechanisms, including the UN Women, and this is another challenge that will be discussed within the framework of the EU directive in recent future. Finally, I would like to draw some conclusions and I will end my speech and give the floor to you. First, the supportive frameworks for law implementation and egalitarian frameworks for monitoring, documenting, facilitating, and enforcing gender equality are largely missing across income groups and countries. This is the global finding that we can draw from the recent research reports. Second, the current challenge is to promote integrated thinking and action, ensuring that gendered concerns are not confined to Sustainable Development 5 alone. In other words, it should not be siloed in the section of the Sustainable Development Goal number 5. Instead, these concerns of gender equality ought to be integrated into the execution of other pertinent sustainable development goals such as water, climate, justice, food, etc. And only this way we can prevent the detrimental effects or the trade-offs that marginalize women and girls. And this approach can also foster interactions and supportive strategies between gendered rights and capabilities, supporting sustainable development policies and discussions across the sectors. And the third, the positive obligations of the state for sustainable development goals are essential, and we cannot proceed with the support of the member states of the United Nations. However, the civil institutional partnerships, collaborative platforms and initiatives that consider the gender equalities, dimensions, and intersectional inequalities are most effective forms of collaboration. So we have to think about the collaborative forms of actions as institutions and as individuals. Sustainable development requires governance and action that span from global to national and to local levels, with reflection, with deliberation and collaborative action of all social stakeholders and institutions. And if well coordinated, the multi-level and multi-centered approaches, including the knowledge of institutions, including the knowledge of the civil society, the experiences of women, the feminist scholarship and civil society, they can be more and more effective for addressing environmental, economic, and social challenges. I would like to extend my sincere regards for your interest and patience. Now I would like to open the floor to the audience. Thank you so much. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry to take the floor first, but maybe I can get the questions going. IFLA is very committed to advocacy for a standalone culture goal in the post-2030 development framework. And we feel a culture goal would help elevate the role of culture in achieving all of the SDGs. And we've seen from some of the VNRs in the past year that culture has been noted alongside gender equality. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on whether the cultural barriers on one side or using cultural leaders or cultural spaces to address some of these issues. So I wonder if you have any thoughts around linking this to elevating the role of culture in sustainable development.
Thank you so much. Because of the time constraints, probably it may be better that we collect all the questions and then I can respond to the questions. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation, a real keynote speech within this conference. My question concerns indicators, and in particular, how libraries can contribute and how can they assess the contribution they give to the Agenda 2030 in SDG 5. I can see very easily how they can contribute to SDG 5A and SDG 5B. But for instance, I'll give you an example. There are several libraries, I don't know how many, that claim to be safe places for women. Is this a possible indicator as a contribution to the Agenda 2030?
Thank you so much.
Okay, my question is going back to gender pay gap. In Czech Republic, 80% employees of libraries are women, and their salary is lower, like 60%. Compare how high they have to be educated as a librarians. It has to be master degree and everything. Do you have some strategy how to change this view of how important work they are doing in libraries? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. My little intervention may be a sort of contribution, and then the question lastly. One is about the statistics you rolled out. about the women as a victim. I think one of the missing statistics that has not been captured adequately is women and children as victims of war and insurgents, particularly from areas that I'm coming from, where there is a higher rate of insurgents. And we see how women have become a victim and the children vulnerable to such a crisis. So I think the statistics, they need to be captured, which has not been adequately captured. Another second issue is about the domestic violence. In the developing countries, one of the triggers of a domestic violence is the low income of a family level, where men probably in a sort of provided the needs of the family, and they become vulnerable. And it has a connection between this early marriage and then the low income of a family and then the domestic violence, and which need to be addressed as well. The third aspect, which the other participant has made an inquiry about, is the role of libraries and librarians. Particularly in the librarian profession, women are taking over the field, and we feel that there should be a very significant role of library and librarians in the intervention of addressing gender violence. Thank you very much.
And if I can...
Thank you, yes.
On the other hand part.
Yeah.
Just to follow up the part on
Okay.
Violence against women in crisis, if you can briefly also talk about the climate crisis and how this will continue to put more pressure on women on all the issues that you presented, and what aspect of policy and law we need to pay attention to now as this crisis become part of the discussions.
Okay, my name is Ife Evangelo, being from the University of Nigeria. My concern, when you were talking, you showed something that said we should stop early child marriage, okay? So now, there's some communities, from where I'm coming from, by their religion, they are made to marry early. So now my question is, how would you advocate for this, being that their religion encourages early child marriage? It's a concern because religion-wise, they can't break it. So how do we tackle it? It's a big challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. More questions, more comments? If there are no questions or comments, I would like to respond to the questions and comments. Thank you so much for all those timely and truly inspirational questions and comments. In terms of culture, yes, this is just a very sensitive issue. However, it is also a priority concern that we have to consider and integrate when we try to develop policies, meaningful policies for sustainable development and sustainable development goals 5, gender equality. However, in terms of culture, probably we should also keep on mind the Article 5 of the CEDAW, of the Convention on Elimination of All Kinds of Discrimination Against Women. This convention is also known as the Constitution of Women's Rights. And Article 5 of this convention refers to the positive obligations of the contracting states to eliminate the gender stereotypes, which refers to the subordination or the inferior status of women and girls. So it is just a positive obligation of the states. And in some sectors, the opposite may be also true for boys and men in terms of providing a meaningful gender representation, prevention of occupational segregation according to the sexes. Sometimes additional policies may be applied to men force to provide a gender-balanced environment at the workplace, for example. However, the culture should be deemed as a dynamic concept. It is not something frozen. It is dynamic, and it is, in most cases, the culture and the religion, which also interacts with the culture and as a part of culture, is open to a dynamic process, dynamic interpretations. And if we think about the violations of human rights based on human dignity, as regards violence, as regards other discriminatory practices, including the gender and other intersectional inequalities, we have to think about how we can integrate the culture as a positive component of development, how we can promote the culture as well, and how we can make the culture as a positive contributor, as a multiplier of the sustainable development and gender equality, by striking the right balance, by protecting the rights related with the culture, because the culture has also a dimension of culture-specific human rights. However, if there is a contradiction, if there is a violation of human dignity, and if the core principles of human rights are under danger because of some cultural arguments, not by the culture itself, we should be very, very careful. In this sense, female genital mutilation, for example, and other harmful practices applied to women and girls, all those issues can be easily justified by some cultural arguments, but not by the culture itself. In this sense, very careful and thoughtful policies should be considered, considering the transformative nature of culture and cultural policies, by, of course, showing respect to the diversity of cultural thoughts, cultural expressions, cultural heritage as well. This is a very delicate and sensitive issue. I am fully aware of this issue. However, we should be more sensitive and more cautious as regards protection of human rights, and particularly the human dignity. And the CEDAW, the Convention on Elimination of all kinds of discrimination against women, it is just a very old treaty, by the way. It has been adopted at late 80s. However, it refers a solution, and it refers to the eradication of gender stereotypes that refers to the inferior or subordinated status of either sexes. And this is the positive obligation of the state according to the international human rights law. The second point is, of course, the role of women in peace building, the role of women or the victim status of women in crisis and in emergency situations. All those issues are to be addressed, particularly by considering a nuanced approach, country-specific processes, country-specific issues, considering the culture as a dimension of the solution, not as a dimension of the problem itself. However, this is another point, and I am thankful to you that you have brought to my attention. Because of the time limits, it is impossible to put emphasis on all aspects of gender equality. However, the victim status of women during democratic transitions, in violent and turbulent times, and their role in the peace-building process, all those issues should be addressed in a very nuanced way and in a very specific way, of course, by dealing the data. There are different types of reports, and there are different types of resolutions or actions of the United Nations as regards women and peace and the protection of women and girls in conflict situations. Another point that I would like to highlight is the role of libraries. Yes, there are many actions actually that can be done for increasing the role of libraries and providing not only a safety zone, a safety space through the libraries, but promoting some sort of an inclusive policy by putting emphasis on the role of libraries. Some libraries have adopted their own gender equality plans or strategic plans for promotion of gender equality, specifically for libraries, or some library associations have also their own vision documents or strategic plans by the inclusion of gender equality. I think that the first positive approach that can be easily done, truly easily done, providing some sort of a gender auditing, a participatory gender auditing for the libraries. For an individual library or for an associational library, libraries may also do that. Even the global associations may also conduct such a study, and it may be quite interesting in terms of highlighting the issues of gender equality by providing a repository as regards libraries that can provide some best practices for promoting gender equality in the libraries, by developing a website including the gender equality plans of the libraries, by gathering some data as regards the institutional capacities of libraries, etc., etc. This is the first thing that can be done easily. And according to my best knowledge, there are some studies on this issue. However, such a big repository may highlight the issue, may also facilitate the exchange of good practices between the libraries. Please excuse me, I really don't know as to whether IFLA has a specific women caucus, some sort of a group, an interest group of women librarians. Probably you have that. In international organizations, in epistemological, in scientific organizations, we have similar interest groups, and this is also quite useful for developing policies, global policies, and exchanging the policies in these types of interest meetings, interest groups, or caucuses. Yes, please.
Just as information, because I'm been a member of the special interest group of IFLA, Women Information and Libraries, but it's closed now, so it does not exist anymore.
Okay, so it may be a good opportunity to launch a discussion as regards reconvening such a group after this speech and after this gathering. And thirdly, for providing some sort of a public good for public interest, it may be, of course, challenging, but it may be truly useful that the libraries gather specific data, particularly university libraries, of course. Probably public libraries may have their own difficulties. However, the university libraries may gather some statistical data, some information, some publicly available repository as regards their own universities for promotion of gender equality, for discussing the issues of gender equality in the libraries, specifically important for the librarians, by organizing regional workshops, international workshops. And I personally think that this speech and this topic may be some sort of a trigger for all those discussions that can be developed throughout the sessions, throughout the interest meetings of the current association, IFLA. I hope I have responded all the questions and the comments very quickly. And now we have only 1 minute. If you have further comments or suggestions, I would be very pleased to listen to them and respond to them. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Erna Winters. I'm working at the KB, National Library of the Netherlands, but also president of IBLIDA. And just a remark on the finishing of the special interest group on women. What are your thoughts? I think it's good that we also incorporate men in the strategy plan. It's not that women have to champion for women, but I think we should try and reach these goals of the equality together as humankind and with men, because if women are only advocating for women, I think it's not in balance then either. So we should strive for equal rights, but always keep in mind that men should be also part of that policy. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you so much. Yes, of course. The ownership is critical in all issues, in all societal issues. The ownership of women and the visibility of women in associations, in institutions, all those issues should be deemed critical. However, the ownership should be accompanied with the partnerships. And men's partnership, yes, different types of partnerships are important. However, in terms of providing a meaningful outcome as regards gender equality, in terms of providing the sustainability, the ownership of the support of men are crucial. I also serve to an association that tries to promote the ownership of men for gender equality. This is the Turkish association, I Am On Your Side. Yanındayız Association, Yanındayız Derneği. So these types of partnerships and these types of inclusive models are quite useful. However, the visibility of women should be ultimately provided, this would be my advice, in the institutions through interest groups, through women's caucuses, or other types of workshops and initiatives in any case. I thank you very much for this truly stimulating and insightful gathering, and I wish you the best day at the rest of the conference. Thank you so much for your kind invitation.